So please join me in thanking Deborah. And our next speaker, perhaps I'll get to that in just a tick. I'll do the introduction. Our next speaker is Simon Underschultz. Would you like to hop onto the stage? Simon is the archivist at the National Gallery of Australia, where he manages the gallery's art archives and special collections. His background is in philosophy and film studies, and he writes horror stories.
Yeah, I didn't know you were going to put
Sorry.
that part in. That's all right. All good.
So
I'm not going to put a link to those, by the way.
Which is,
They're not
I
very
think
good.
It's an excellent bunch of unusual partners. At the National Gallery, the archive staff collaborated with curators to celebrate the gallery's 40th anniversary, and he's going to present his reflections today in his session, the Inspiring Archive Exploring Curatorial and Artistic Collaboration with Archives. I will get that, if you stand on that side, I'll
Sure.
get that set up for you. It'll be here somewhere.
Yeah, so anyway, I'll just start by saying, so I've worked at the National Gallery since 2013, and I started in special collections, and at the end of 2020 I became the archivist. I really enjoy working there. It's a fascinating collection, and the people I get to work with are characters and really interesting. We have a small team, so we have a research library in the gallery. There's 5 of us in terms of permanent staff, and I work with a library and archive assistant and one volunteer who comes in once a week on the archives. We've got over, here we go. Excellent. Oh, so there it is. There's the library, but that's how it looked in 1982. We don't have the pot plants anymore, but the chairs are the same. So yeah, unfortunately. So that's how it looks today. So yes, but we do have a lot of natural light, so it's quite nice. So this is where we will prepare the archive materials if people do request them. All of our archives are held off-site in a storage facility, but the library is primarily for curatorial research. That's kind of its raison d'etre as being why we exist, but we also offer a reference service for external clients and researchers as well, remotely. So as I was saying, so we've got over 150 collections of art archives, which take up over 570 linear meters. So it's quite a substantial collection, being that it is a specialist collection where everything we have is in some way related to the visual arts. So a lot of the kind of archives we have are artist archives, primarily Australian, obviously, the archives of galleries, but we also have our institutional archives, which include curatorial papers, papers of past directors, as well as the Architect's Archive, which is what I'm going to talk a bit about today. So as Rachel mentioned, the National Gallery this month is celebrating its 40th anniversary. It was opened to the public on the 13th of October, 1982. And so there's been, actually, it's been interesting because, like I became archivist at the end of 2020, and really since then there's been a lot of activity and drawing from the institutional archives to kind of articulate our identity for staff to learn about our history so that it can be used in a couple of the art projects that I'm going to talk about as examples of ways that artists collaborate with archivists and with archives. So yeah, it's been a fascinating couple of years. And that's really what I wanted to share with you today, is kind of my reflections on these projects, because they're quite unique and interesting, and kind of share that. I think if artists are aware of them, that they could use not just gallery archives, but any archives in their artistic practice in really interesting and unpredictable ways that I think engage the public with archives in ways we might never have thought of. In a 2004 article, American art critic and historian Hal Foster argued that there's, quote, an archival impulse at work internationally in contemporary art. Excuse me. Archival artists seek to make historical information often lost or displaced physically present, end quote. So one of the special things we get to do as archivists is work with primary sources, which is direct evidence of human activity. And in this case, it's direct evidence of an artist's original thinking, of an artist's activity. And these are designs by the architect of the National Gallery, Col Madigan. His Sydney firm won the competition in 1968 that was held to design the National Gallery. And I'll just share, I'll go back. So these are some of the cool designs and original concepts. And he kind of had this real idea around the equilateral triangle as being this code that underpins the physical structure of the gallery. And that was in sort of his thesis. In his architectural statement, he said, quote, "The gallery has a complex structure, and through the genesis of this complexity is a simple triangle. The simple numerical structure of the equilateral triangle extended into the third dimension produces tetrahedral and octahedral crystals, and this geometric evolvement generates a harmony within the building." And you see that throughout the archive. You see he had, almost you could say, there we go. So that's one of the illustrations of the original opening walkway and doorway. And whenever I look around the gallery now, I see triangles. I even see, I don't know if it's just me, but I even see them in the shadows that the gallery casts on itself. And it almost, there's symbolism in that it reflects the parliamentary triangle, which I think came into his thinking. I also have a little sort of theory that I think the moon landing factored into his design because that was sort of in the zeitgeist at the time, but not 100% sure. But the main reason I'm going into this is because this is kind of what inspired New Zealand artist Daniel Crooks in his work that he created in a gallery commission for the Enlighten festival. So it was a large-scale projection onto the building, curated by Elspeth Pitt, and the resulting work is called Structured Light. And the work celebrates the design of the original building and pays homage to the architect. And I was first alerted to this work, this commission by Elspeth, who was presenting to all staff and saying, this is the idea and stuff. And I said, we've got all this amazing stuff in the archives that you might want to look at. And she came and looked, and we got into dialogue with Daniel. And he just kind of became quite fascinated and came and looked through the archives. And he wanted to incorporate that into his artwork. This is one of my favorite items, actually, that we came across. This is a photograph by the artist David Moore of the gallery model, the architectural model, disassembled into its component parts. Kind of almost makes it look like a toy. So that's it projected onto the building. I'm not sure if this is going to work. I had a video, but it doesn't seem to be playing. So I had some drone footage of the actual I was worried that the videos might not work, but that's okay. We'll press on. One thing, I wanted to just say a quote as well. So in an interview with the curator Elspeth regarding using the archive, Daniel Crooks said, quote, I was inspired by Madigan's geometry and hand drawings and the very analog nature of them. Architecture has become so digitalized, but back then it was very real. There was even correction fluid on his drawings, end quote. So I don't know if anyone here has had a chance to see the work. It was actually played again last week for the 40th anniversary, but it was pretty incredible. And it kind of distorts the public space and actually makes it look like the gallery pieces are moving. So I'm moving on now because the video didn't work, but the construction of the gallery started in the early 70s, 1973, and was completed in 1981. And this is actually one of the fun things you find in archives sometime. We had this film can that was unlabeled, and we had it digitized, and it ended up being aerial footage of the gallery while it was under construction. And that video is not going to work either, but that is a video. And it's helicopter flying over around that time, which is amazing seeing it like that stark. It almost looks like it's in the middle of a desert, if you're familiar with how the gallery looks now. So while the building was being constructed, so where was the art collection and where were all the staff during all that time? Well, they were in Fyshwick. So in Fyshwick, there was a warehouse called the Rotunda, which was a disused shopping centre, and that's where the staff worked. Were working while the gallery was being built. And this is actually a still from a documentary where world-renowned art critic Robert Hughes came and visited Fyshwick in 1976 and was interested in this new gallery that was being made, and he came and spoke to the founding director, who's on the far left, and kind of questioning him about his reasoning behind making certain art purchases. In particular, he grills him about blue poles. So this documentary we uncovered is fully available. We've got the license and it's available on our website. It's really worth checking out. And they do the first sort of uncrating of blue poles, and Robert Hughes is like, well, it's not actually that big, is it? And Mollison's like, oh no, it's pretty big, I think. So yes, moving on to the actual opening by Her Majesty the Queen on the evening of the 12th of October 1982 in the presence of about 850 guests, and this was broadcast to over 2 million people, and the recording of that broadcast is also on our website if you're interested. But the main reason I'm bringing this part up as well is because there was an artwork that used this broadcast recording. It was called Opening Night, The Order of Arrangements, and it was created by two artists, Di Baker-Smith and Veronica Tello. And I think it just relates to this quote that in her 2018 article, Contemporary Art, the Archive and Curatorship, Possible Dialogues, researcher, curator, and professor Priscilla Arente states that, quote, the development of curatorial and artistic projects with the collection and archives of a given institution can bring interesting new readings to the collection, enabling the narrative of the institution itself to be rewritten, which I think really applies here. because these are stills from the video essay in which Di and Veronica reconstruct opening night in a way that problematizes and analyzes how museum histories are reproduced and repeated through documents from libraries and archives. And they do this, they juxtapose that very formal, celebratory and colonial opening order of arrangements with behind-the-scenes footage of storage areas and workers, such as conservators, registration, art handlers, photographers, who the artists point out in the video are mainly women. And they say, these are actually the artists walking into the library here on the far right. And the Di Baker-Smith said in an interview, quote, "Women tend to dominate as workers in a museum, for example. They care for the archives and artworks as librarians and art handlers, even if they are marginal in the collection. This comes out in our video essay as it traces how museum histories are reproduced." And the opening night order of arrangements was originally screened at the National Gallery's Know My Name conference, which ran in November 2020. And if you're not familiar, Know My Name was an exhibition of Australian women artists, but it was also part of a series of ongoing gender equity initiatives by the gallery to increase representation of all women in its artistic program, collection development, and organizational structures. So I just, as I come to the end, I just think that these collaborations have kind of exposed really interesting ways that artists can use archives to look at history and reinterpret history and kind of recast it and replay it in really engaging modes. And I think by continuing to sort of promote and increase these collaborations, we can find sort of new ways for people to experience their cultural history. Looking ahead, I'm really interested in actually speaking more with my colleagues at the art school at the ANU to kind of talk about archives and how important that is in art practice, and also what that can be used for in some of these examples. But thank you all so much for listening. Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you, Simon, for that presentation. And I was just wondering about how do you sort of avoid the curators just saying, "Oh, that's pretty," and there might be a situation where somebody gets a pretty record, and frames it and puts it on a wall. How do you provide some of that sort of? Is that the archival impulse, or how do you provide some context?
Yeah, so I guess the main thing is like just that sort of, I suppose, more traditional role of providing access through finding aids and making the material available for display and research in a way that's safe and that won't damage the material. But we definitely support exhibition of archive material as well, as long as it doesn't obviously damage the material or anything like that. But it's really been the main thing is just a process of ensuring like curators are aware of everything that we have. So it's actually kind of being ahead of the ball game of knowing the exhibition plan coming up over the next year and going, what archives might have material that would be useful.
Yes, yeah. There's a question in the back left corner. Mike will come to you.
Hello, it's Kate Pulford from Prince Alfred College in Adelaide. I think you just answered my question about is the collaboration kind of organic, as in your work with Elizabeth Pitt, because she's part of the National Gallery. Did that happen organically? But you just talked about programming, so it's interesting to be able to have archives available to curators in that space as well, and wondered if that has happened organically otherwise.
Speaking purely from my own personal experience, curators are so incredibly busy and they have so much pressure on them and they have so many, different competing priorities that I kind of feel like my job is to come to them and be aware of what they're doing and bring them the information that they need that might be useful. And that's, I see as a big part of my role, actually. Yeah.
Do I need the microphone? Yes, please. I can't down here. Thank you.
I know you can hear me, Simon. Simon, that was fantastic. I've got lots of other questions, but the main one is around your role, and I think this is possibly of interest. Is advocacy written into your job description? Like, is your work doing outreach with the curators tracked and measured in any way for to be more forensic, or?
That's a really good question. I don't know if it's in my job role. Maybe.
Maybe it should be.
I think it probably should be. But it's a big part of what I do now. And as I was saying, we do offer, like, we're doing, like, on a pretty much day-to-day basis, reference queries for curators for research. Sorry, what was the second part of your question?
No, I'll talk to you at lunch about all my other. I wanted to find out about your preservation challenges and how you invite artists in and all sorts of things. But there's no time for that today.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I don't know if I answered
thanks.
you.
That was really great.
But thanks.
Any other questions? Yes, one here.
Hi, Nicole Rawson from the Brett Whiteley Studio in New South Wales. More of a comment. I definitely understand what you mean about curators being rushed and not having a lot of time and always being busy. The reason our head of the studio and our curator is so aware of the archives is because they're literally in her office space. So every time she's making an exhibition, she's like, oh, what about, like, maybe could you find something like this? So it's physically she can't ignore it, but it also means she's very aware of it. But even when we have the exhibition plans and trying to think about material that I can pull out to sort of be a benefit and provide a wider context to what's happening, sometimes it doesn't always work, but it's really great because she's aware of it. And when we do other initiatives like a digital 360 tours of the spaces and the exhibitions, we can add in archival content which might not make sense in the physical space, but in the digital space where people can have a look at and it can be extra information, it works really well there.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, totally agree. But
Other question.
So, Belinda Hennessy from the National Archives. I just have a question about the use of your archives by the conservation sort of department. Do you sort of find that because you sort of, you indicated you had records from artists and that kind of thing, do you find that some of that material contains a lot of their techniques and sort of the materials they use, and is that of use to conservators when they're doing their work on artworks for restoration or conservation and preservation? And just another question was all the sort of recent sort of floods around the place. Have you had more demand on some of that material because people are having to do that work in this time of climate change where there is a lot of disasters happening where artworks and things like that are affected?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of actually, definitely in terms of the conservation aspect, but particularly install actually. The archives are used because some of the works are so complex to install. Looking at the archives will actually, they'll see the sort of instructions and even video. Like I shared with our head objects conservator video of the Brancusi birds being first installed and how that was done, and that was really useful to her. But yeah, definitely we are so lucky to have such a big conservation department right next to us, so I've tried to make that a priority in terms of collaborating with them because they have experts in every single medium, so I can actually draw on that and we can help each other. So yeah, again, big part of my role I just see is forming those collaborative relationships and being open and, being open to criticism as well if we are doing something the wrong way that we can improve on in terms of preservation. So yeah, I hope that answers sort of, but yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for...
Oh, thank you.
Thank you to our three speakers, Michaela Hart, Deborah Lee Talbot, Simon Underschultz, for giving us some great ideas on usual and unusual partners. We can't all marry a scientist, but, you know, it's a good start. But thank you, everybody, for coming to the session today, and enjoy the lunch, which will be out there. Thanks very much.